We'll call the meeting to order. Tara, can you handle the roll call on this one?
I think so. Charlie Hoffman?
Yes.
Mike Morris?
Yes. Michael, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
All stand, salute, pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comments. Members of the public will be allowed to address the Feather River West Levee Financing Authority Board of Directors on items of interest to the public that are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board. Any member of the audience who may wish to bring a matter before the board that has not been placed on the agenda may do so at this time. However, state law provides that no action may be taken on any item not appearing on the agenda. We don't have any members of the public. The consent calendar. Michael, do you have any opposition to approving it the way it is?
No, I'll make the motion.
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, we're there. Approval of resolution 2022-11 establishing an assessment appeal policy related to the Feather River West Levee Operations and Maintenance Assessment District. Michael, would you explain that, please?
Yeah, I'm actually going to turn it over to Seth Wurzel, and he's going to walk the board through this item.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so what we're asking the board to do today, based on direction that we received at a prior board meeting on outstanding issues to handle after the approval of the assessment, is to consider a formal assessment appeals policy. So we've prepared a resolution for the board to consider that establishes that formal appeals policy and process, primarily related to the timing and how we're going to handle appeals going forward. So the engineer's report that was approved by the board included a section on appeals, and the attached resolution clarifies that. Essentially, in the engineer's report, what it says is any property owner who believes that an attribute or a factor of the assessment calculation, if it's incorrect, that they can file an appeal. The appeal must include a statement why the calculation is incorrect and should provide supporting evidence. It lays out a process where the first step is review. It actually notes the general manager, the formal title for the head staff person for the agency in the JPA agreement is executive director. And so the first step is reviewed by the executive director, and if that decision by the executive director is not agreeable to the property owner, then they can appeal to the board, and the board would make the final decision. The other thing that it makes absolutely clear is that any approved appeals resulting in corrections for the current fiscal year that they're appealing would not be retroactive. And so if for some reason, someone files an appeal 5 years from now and they've paid 5 years of assessments and they're appealing on the 6th year and it's found that perhaps there's a valid issue there that and the board's the executive director is agreeable that we're going to change the assessment, that doesn't mean we go back and pay them for the 5 years that they've already paid. It's only for then that current year and then any year going forward.
On your slide, Seth, you have that in bold type. I would certainly suggest that we do that on our policy because I think that's critical.
Yeah, to the extent that after the board adopts a resolution, if we want to put together like a summary sheet or something like that on the process, I think that's a great idea. And that's essentially why that was clear. It's like, look now, and the theory there being is that the money's been spent. It's not like it's there available to give back to the property owner at that point.
Is that the only way how the calculations would be wrong, honestly, would be as if they got it rezoned, right?
No, I guess there's a possibility that if we use data from the county on square footage and things like that, and there was an error or the county's the assessor's records didn't reflect square footage, but we have really land use issues and physical attributes are really only issues I think that would most likely come up. Flood depths and things like that. That's kind of already set.
Yeah. Okay.
Based on our analysis and the data that we've done.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. So the real appeals resolution sort of goes into more detail and clarifies some things for us. Just by way of background, Frwlfa has to submit the roll to the county auditor controller by August 10th in order for it to basically take part in the county's tax billing process. The county is really providing a tax billing service for you and just adding that, that line item as a direct charge on the tax bill for you. If you want to do that, participate in that process, you got to get them the data by August 10th. And the county would typically issue property tax bills sometime in October. And with, as everybody knows, property tax day is December 10th and April 10th. So they provide you that bill in early October. They have to get it to you by November 1st. That's in statute. And then it's delinquent after December 10th, 50% after December 10th, and the other remaining 50% by April 10th.
I assume in the document that amounts to our policy will have something about the time frame. You know,
that's exactly right.
Short time frame for somebody to file an appeal and have it acted upon.
That's absolutely right. So the direction that we went with was really to follow Sutter Butte's policy for its assessment. And so the cutoff for a current year assessment appeal inquiry is November 1st. So if you got your bill in October, sometime mid-October, you need to look at it. If you have an issue for the current year's assessment, we need to have your appeal received by November 1st. And part of what drives that is the county's process for amending tax bills later. So you know, there's certain time frames and costs associated with the later that you contact the county as a direct charging agency and say to them, hey, we need to change someone's assessment. If you do that really late, they're going to charge you more and more in the process. And so, you know, we're really trying to take advantage of the fact that the county sends their tax bills out early before the deadline of November 1st and cutting it off at that point in time. Now, the remainder of the time frame process is that we would acknowledge the assessment appeal within 15 days from receipt. So the property owner sends us a letter and says, hey, I think this is wrong. We have 15 days to acknowledge that, and then another 15 days to come up with a decision. That's a little bit of a deviation from Sutter Butte's process. Sutter Butte's process, as it's adopted now, is we'll acknowledge receipt within 5 days and get you an initial response within 15. I took it upon myself to sort of think about, well, what's the staff of this agency going to look like in the long term? It's only going to be one person. And so my thought was giving them a little bit more time to be able to handle that. So that's a deviation from Sutter Butte's policy, is that acknowledgement of the receipt of the appeal. I recommended moving that from 5 days to 15 days to give us a little more time. So that's what's reflected in the policy today, and that's really what the policy clarifies beyond what the engineer's report had, is just that time frame for everyone to understand. So that's
cuts into duck season, doesn't it, Drew?
yeah, right. So that's essentially the thing that I think might be worthwhile to discuss further if the board wants to make any suggestions, is really think about that deadline of appeal from the property owner for the then current year. I think it's going to be tough the first year, as you guys have mentioned in the past. There's going to be a lot of people looking at it because it's going to be a new charge. So we would expect that first year to be pretty heavy. The other thing to take into consideration for this year is we understand the county has a new property tax system, and so they're really shooting to get data to their vendor who prints and mails out their bills, according to the county auditor's office, by, I think he said, October 14th. I don't know how long it takes them to mail out, I don't know how many thousands of parcels, but tens of thousands of parcels. So if, and you would know this better than I do being a resident in Sutter County, when do you typically get your bills? Sometime mid-October, maybe second week. It might be a little later this year because of their new property tax system. We've been working, Sutter Butte's been working closely with the county on getting the data to them for the direct charges for its bill, and I'm sure there are many other agencies that are kind of working through that same process. Essentially, everybody's APN numbers changed, whereas you had, I believe it was a 8-digit or maybe a 7 or 8-digit APN number. Now everybody has 9-digit APN numbers, so they kind of switched to match a lot of other counties and how they handle their books and map pages and their APN records.
Now, Zeth, the way I understood it, they're not getting charged this year.
Frwlfa is not going to be submitting you're absolutely right. This year, we're not submitting a charge. We're talking, first year would be 23-24.
Right.
So we may not have that same issue. You're right.
So that gives us a year to kind of get ready for it?
Yeah, exactly.
And if they've got bugs in their system a year from now, we could always come up with something.
You're right. Absolutely. So yeah, really the first year would be 23-24 in this context.
Okay, do we need a motion to approve this policy? It makes sense to me.
I'll make the motion.
Second it.
I like the 15 days, Zeth. Thank you.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. I assume you're done? I'm not cutting you off?
I'm done with that item. I just created a slide for this first item for Michael, the next item, but I'll handle the later items, so I'll stand right here.
Well, the next item is the appointment of a general manager and executive director.
Seth, are you covering this one?
I think I just had a recommendation there.
Yeah, so really this was a short item, as far as setting up for the agency to set up, define and set up an executive director. The recommendation is to appoint the Levy District 1 general manager as the executive director of Frwlfa. We felt that made the most sense, and we identified it as titles in case in the future Drew is not around. It's whoever is that general manager of Levy District 1. So that's the staff recommendation. I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
When I've spoken with Drew, he loves the title. He's a little disappointed that it doesn't come with a huge incremental increase in his salary, but that's the way it is for now anyhow, so. So Drew, just for the public record, you don't have any trouble with being the executive director, okay?
No, it begins now or when the assessment gets.
No, it would begin now.
You have a year to get everything going.
Just think if you're in a big high-level meeting, you can tell somebody you're the executive director. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the main purpose here is, to the extent that there are contracts and things like that.
Right, no, I think.
You have a designee to be able to handle it.
I appreciate you doing that, Drew, by the way. So, do we need a motion on this, Michael?
Yes.
I'll make the motion.
I'll second it. Since we've made a motion and a second, and there's only two of us, I assume we are going to pass this with an aye. Number 5, the approval of amendment number 1 to the funding and services agreement between Feather River West Levy Financing Authority and Sutter Butte Flood Control Agency.
Right.
Is that you, Seth?
That's me also.
All right.
I'll go ahead and handle this. So our recommendation is to approve amendment number 1 to that services agreement that you referenced. Just by way of background, in June 2020, one of the first actions that the agency took was to approve a services agreement with Sutter Butte to address administrative board clerk and procurement services. Primarily, the biggest part of the scope of work was to advance a new operations and maintenance assessment district. And then essentially our service was to fund those costs. And then, there was a jackpot of other things as mutually agreed upon. It contemplated in that agreement, if the assessment formation was successful, that the cost of the services that had been provided would be reimbursed over time. But the agreement punted and indicated that repayment would be part of a new agreement. With the successful formation of the assessment district, we recommend that amendment number 1 be that new agreement and essentially address those outstanding issues that were in that prior agreement in terms of costs and reimbursement. So what the amendment would do is it would limit the cost of services to be provided by Sutter Butte to Frwlfa to a recommended $750,000 total. The current expenses that have been incurred to date are around $640,000. So it would provide for another $110,000 of services to be able to support the agency through the completion of a first year's full year of assessment, essentially June of 2024. The goal over the course of that year would be to establish the regular processes and procedures for annual administration of the agency on a recurring basis, so that you'd have basically a set of files that it's the January meeting. What do we do in this meeting? Reduce, reuse, recycle there, and kind of repeat those services. I think the regular administration of the agency, there shouldn't be unique issues coming up each year that would require a lot of new effort. So if we get through a full year of service, we'd have that file to be able to replicate that effort on an annual basis going forward. The second part of the agreement, the amendment number 1, would address repayment. We essentially would have the repayment commence after June 2024 for a payment for a period of 15 years. If we hit that maximum amount of services of $750,000, then essentially the maximum amount of the payment would be $50,000 a year for the next 15 years. If it's something less, what the agreement says, you just divide it by 15. So if we don't hit up the 750, then it would be less. The budget included within the assessment that was passed had a line item for repayment repayment to agencies, and the dollar amount that was budgeted was $65,000. So we're well within that limit, and so that's essentially how it would happen. In more detail, essentially in June of 2024 or whenever Frwlfa decides it's done, it doesn't need Sutter Butte's help anymore. So long as it's within that 750, it'd send a letter to Sutter Butte and say, we're done, thank you for your help. Within, I think we gave ourselves 30 days, Sutter Butte would provide a notice back to Frwlfa and say, hey, here's what the total costs of the services are, and divide that by 15. And then after Sutter Butte provides that notice, then the first payment would commence that year, expected to be around June of 2024, and then the next payment would be June of 2025 and thereafter. So we give ourselves some cushion that first year to kind of wrap up the services, provide the final accounting, and then figure out what we're doing from there.
Does that amendment make sense to you, Michael?
Yes.
You make the motion, please.
I'll make the motion to pass that.
I'll second.
All in favor? Oh,
Aye.
sorry. Aye.
Aye.
You got 2 chairs up here, by the way.
Thank you, Seth. Are you going to do the services update as well, since you're at the podium? Or?
Yeah, so I wanted to just bring back up to the board some of the remaining items that we talked about. So we handled several of the items that were brought before the board at its July meeting. Some of those remaining items are listed here on this slide and the next one. So we need to address future annual assessment administration, and so that would entail engaging with Wildan to get a proposal from them to do the regular annual administration. I think one of the things we wanted to talk about was kind of keep the board apprised of the MA3 annexation by LD1, because that's our trigger for the first year's assessment. That action needs to have taken place before we start levying the assessment, and so the board needs to be kept apprised of that. We also talked about a process for transferring funding from LD1 or from Frwlfa to LD1 and LD9, formalizing that. And then some of the other items are to establish a treasury and treasury services between Frwlfa and the county. And then other business matters and things like that to address. So this is just a kind of a tracking list for us to keep track of as we meet and address issues. So I think some of the things that as staff we might reach out and try to deal with are establishing this treasury, and then perhaps just documenting something for the board to address how the funding will be split between from Frwlfa to LD1 and LD9. There's really no rush on that yet. And then I think the other one would be engagement with Wildan to get a proposal from them to do annual administration, so that we have that all set and ready to go.
Is that are you familiar with any other JPAs, how they do this?
In terms of assessment administration or?
Treasury and all that good stuff.
Yeah, most, like in the case of Sutter Butte, normally it's identified within the JPA agreement. In the case of Sutter Butte, it identified Yuba City to do the treasury services. Most, I think JPA law, in fact, I guess addresses and says it's either a county or a CPA. That's required, and so Yuba City has accountants on staff. But normally there's a cost for that service. And so they would tend to say, hey, here's our agreement. You're agreeing to pay these service costs. And so there has to be a contract in place.
Okay.
From a mechanical standpoint, Seth, we're going to need a checking account, which is probably going to require some money, which we don't have. How do we get that done?
Well, the checking account would be the treasurer's office. They would handle it. And so I don't think they have the same kind of requirements like a bank would have up front. But I think they would want that agreement in place before you put money in the bank. Right. So that's essentially what we would want to get done before we send a roll to the county to say, hey, they want to know where the money's going to go when they receive it.
I'm quite sure that they're after, and correct me if I'm wrong, but after the JPA meets and we agree upon on who gets what amount and everything, then it would be just as if it is now, where county just cuts a check for everything. Just tell them where it goes.
Exactly. I think when I talk about a formalized process, you're going to get 50% of the money, approximately 50% of the money in January from the December 10th installment. So we want to set up that process of how much goes to pay off Frwlfa's expenses, and then the rest gets split. Then the next installments comes, we pay expenses, and then that amount gets split. And so, LD1,
so county's actually always holding it. We just tell them where to.
Yeah, they just tell them what fund to put it in.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And in some case, I don't know what their process is. They may actually cut a check and then just hand it put it in one pocket and move it to the other, or something like that. And
it's our understanding, Seth, that the county will still make an ad valorem contribution to LD9?
Yeah, that's not going to change. There's nothing that we've done that would otherwise change that. So the TRA splits as they are right now for the property that's within LD9, none of that's going to change. The only way that would change in my mind would be through a LAFCO process in the future. Where
without that, we would basically, I would assume, come up with the revenue from the ad valorem tax plus the assessments that would come from Frwlfa and determine those amounts based on what it was paid, basically, I guess. Huh?
Yeah, if I'm tracking you, I think that makes sense. And I guess when we get into this, a little bit more of the mechanics of the issue, perhaps we could present options for how to account for that and how to address timing and things like that. If there's a certain amount that came to LD9 and through that ad valorem that was assumed to be there, and how did that reconcile?
In theory, that what was coming to LD9 from the Frwlfa assessment would be less than what might be required for the administration of LD9. So I wouldn't think that the ad valorem would be a bonus on top of that. So I would think they would probably be combined.
The assessment budget assumed that revenue was still coming to LD9. Oh. I think that's what, Andrew, did I preempt what you were about to say?
More or less, yeah. It's that LD9 would have two sources of revenue.
Right.
Yeah.
But the Prop 218 election budget included, as Seth just said, the ad valorem that LD9 already takes or already accepts. Yeah.
Michael, do you have any questions?
Nope.
So just in terms of the normal slides that we provide to the board on where we sit with the budget. So for the assessment district formation, as I mentioned, the total budget was $663,297. What Sobufka approved today brings that up to $670,000. So it was approximately $7,000 add to the overall budget. That would leave about $19,000 remaining to close out the project based on remaining budget plus their total costs. So that's reflected here in terms of that the bottom of this table, task order 2. We processed the $7,000 amendment, and when you add that to the remaining about 12,000, that's where the 19,000 comes in. So we'll be closed out with the services with HDR after that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're about considering that additional remaining 20,000, we're about 637,000 or close to 640 in costs.
We're at a juncture here. I would assume that we'll get a proposal from HDR and Willdan as far as what their hourly services would amount to going forward, or how would we do that?
Well, so essentially HDR services are done. So what we'll be doing is seeking a proposal just directly with Willdan to do the administrative. Yeah. And
they'll give us some proposal on an hourly basis, or
exactly. Usually, I think they actually have their firm tends to take more of a fixed fee approach. So, say a contract term of 3 years for assessment administration, at a fixed amount. That's essentially how Sutter Butte's contract is with Willdan, and then Willdan. Correct. Yeah, I think that's our intent is for them to leverage the parcel database and information that they previously had with Sutter Butte, and so that's why they, for at least in the beginning, the first years of assessment after formation, it's generally a wise practice to go with the same firm that did the formation for the first year's administration.
Very good.
So that's it.
Michael, do you or Andrea have anything else to add?
No, that's it. As you can see, Sabufka staff will be working on the items Seth articulated here to keep this agency moving forward and setting up all the needed policies in place and having those so that they can be run in the future. So that's what we'll be working on near term.
Thank you.
This is scary. It's like being college kids where your parents take care of all the stuff for you, and one day they say, okay, it's yours.
Exactly.
Very good. No objections. We'll stand adjourned. Thank you.